Hello, everyone. I am Luke Reinhardt. Welcome to Closing the Gap, a podcast dedicated to your growth. Brought to you by Wellspring Coaching Services and hosted by myself and my wife, Katie. You know, people have gaps that prevent them from growing. Our goal is to empower you to close those gaps by increasing your awareness, confidence, and clarity. Join us today as we help you close the gap between where you are and where you want to be.
Hey folks, we are here with our podcast, Closing the Gap. It is season 1, episode 4, and today we're talking about knowing your enemy. So Luke, who is your enemy?
Well, I think that more often than not, I think we're our own worst enemy. And when it comes to personal growth and when it comes to relationships, when it comes to goals and achievement, we're often our own worst enemy. And it's critical that we learn that we, one, identify that, and then two, learn how to deal with that as well.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, so, there was a quote in the book E-Myth by Michael Gerber. And it says that the work we do is a reflection of who we are. And there's a little bit more to it, but I just want to take a note on that real quick where it says the work that we do. Because I think we kind of understand that like our attitude is very easily a reflection of who we are. If you walk around acting grumpy all the time, people are just going to identify you as a grumpy person.
Yeah.
Right? So our attitude certainly is a reflection of who we are, and then our actions, the things that we do, how we just treat other people, is going to reflect who we are. If we're being disrespectful to others, then they're going to say, well, they're just a disrespectful person. So we have our attitude, we have our actions, but also our work, and what we mean by that, it could be the product itself sometimes, right? If your job is to mow the grass, then, how well you mow the grass can be a reflection of who you are, right?
Yeah.
And jiu-jitsu, actually, one of the things I do with in our classes that's kind of unique is we circle up together, and then we tie our belts together at the beginning of class. And that symbolizes quite a few different things. But one of the things it symbolizes is the way that you're going to practice. So the way that you tie your belt, if it's sloppy, then I would say you're probably going to practice sloppy, right? And if you tie it carefully, nice and neat, you pay attention to the details, then that's probably how you're going to practice. It's a reflection of how you're going to practice. So that's like a little mindset minute before class that we do, the tying of the belt, that prepares your mind for how you're going to practice, because how you do that can, at the end of the day, it can be a reflection of who you are.
Yeah.
So
sloppy is as sloppy does.
That's right, yeah.
Tidy is as tidy does, maybe.
Yeah. And Michael Gerber says in his quote, he can just say, if you are late to work, it's because you're late inside. If you're bored, it's because you're bored inside. These are all things that stem from within, and that just ultimately becomes a reflection of who we are. Yeah.
It's a great point, and one that we don't often think about.
Yeah, and when we're talking about work, we're talking about who we are, our place of work, and how we do that. We're talking about chores that we do at home. Right. We're talking about school, how we approach school and academics, sports, goals, plenty of places that this idea and this concept can be applied, right?
And often, rather than looking at what's driving us, what's keeping us from doing what we think is a better job or maybe achieving where we want to achieve, we don't often look at this enemy within.
Yeah.
We often pop up with maybe an excuse, right? It was, if I'm late, classic, the traffic was bad, or the guy in front of me or the gal beside me was cutting me off, or the kids, kept me from getting done this, that, and the other. There's always an easy and ready excuse for why we didn't get to where we wanted to be.
Yeah, and honesty is so important, and I've said before that in order to lie to somebody else, you have to lie to yourself first, and convince yourself that your lie is true. Otherwise, you'd be a liar, right? And it's pretty scary. But when it comes to like being late to work, I know I've done that, in the past, so easily myself, where it's like you're running late to work, and while you're driving there, you're thinking of all the reasons why you're late, and none of them are your fault, right? But yeah, you're trying to convince yourself that, traffic is really bad, and whatever the lie was. And there may be some truth to those things, but ultimately it's down to you, and you have to take ownership for those things. But yeah, we tend to try to convince ourselves of those lies first before we can speak it to somebody else. So that's not a good place to be.
No, and I think there's just tremendous freedom in being able to own where you are coming up short.
Yeah.
And we can probably do another podcast totally on the freedom of honesty.
Yeah, absolutely.
But just like you said, first, rather than go to excuse if that's your default, just check within first.
Yeah.
What could I have done to make this situation better, more fluid? How could I have gotten to where I wanted to be a little bit more quickly, accurately, successfully, on my own?
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it's so how we approach all of these different things, as we've listed: chores, work, school, sports, goals. How we approach all of these things reflect who we are.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't want to misunderstand this in the sense that we're saying that you are your achievements.
Right.
Because that can be a slippery slope. It can lead to a sense of worthlessness and depression if your identity is wrapped up in what you're achieving and what you're doing. I've done martial arts all of my life. Part of my identity is in that martial arts, and it's easy to wrap your identity in your success as a business owner or as a competitor or martial artist within itself. It's easy to do that for anybody, but at the end of the day, if your identity is like winning and losing or succeeding and failing, we all do those things. We all can win and we all can lose, but we all do also have like seasons, especially competitively, where you might be winning for a while, but in time, that's going to fade. And if that's what you're basing your identity on, it's going to be a struggle, when your time is over, And in jiu-jitsu, every time that you're on the mat, every time that you roll live, you're going to be stuck in a situation where you're tapping, where you're getting submitted, and you have the choice of to tap out or to get hurt. And obviously, you don't want to get hurt.
No, for sure.
You want to come back and be able to keep training. But the tap out requires, humility. Yeah, and it's very easy to not want to do that. But at the end of the day, again, it's a lesson learned. And if you tap out and get angry and walk off the mat, that's one thing. But if you tap out, you shake hands, you learn from it, you go again, that's another thing.
Yeah.
Right? And that tap out becomes, a reflection of who you are. How you handled the tap out, how you handled the defeat becomes a reflection of who you are. But the fact that you lost to somebody else in that moment, it doesn't mean you're a loser.
No.
Right? It doesn't mean it means in that moment that your partner got the best of you. Right? But that doesn't define you as a person. We're talking about jiu-jitsu, right? Yes, your opponent got you in that moment in jiu-jitsu. And yeah, you do need to admit that. And by admitting that, you're gonna get better and you're gonna grow.
Yeah.
But if you try to avoid that, and that becomes like you feel like if I tap out, then I'm a loser, then yeah, that is gonna begin to identify who you are, and it's not gonna lead to a good place.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
No. I think that we've seen a lot of athletes. We know of work and have worked with many high-level athletes, and there's always seasons that you go through, that they have gone through, where you just aren't performing to your ultimate best.
Mm-hmm.
You could have other things going on in your life. You could have an injury. And these aren't actually like excuses. They're just reality. These are things going on. And so if you're like you're saying, if you're defining who you are based on how well you did at that sport, or even in a work situation, whatever your career or job is. I know I'm a mom and a homeschool teacher, and some days look terrible. It looks messy. I mean, it really does. It looks like, how is anything getting done?
Yeah.
But we're talking about the long game, not the short game.
Right.
So, and anything you're doing, sometimes the short game looks messy. Sometimes it's not working out the way you want. But that is not who you are. That's what you're doing. And I think for us, we've learned so much about how you turn that situation and you don't let it define you, but you kind of stay curious and say, what can I learn from this today? What did I learn about my coworkers, about my children, about my spouse, about my clients, about myself, and then be able to work with that and sort of make the proverbial lemonade out of lemons, really.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can lose or you can fail like a champion, and you can win or you can succeed like a loser,
Yeah.
And that's a really important thing to keep in mind when it comes to whatever it is you're doing in life.
Yeah.
You have winners and losers, and you have people who are going to fail and succeed. That's just part of life. We talked about that in our previous podcast. And in order to grow, we just need to get past that.
Right.
And obviously, we all want to succeed.
Yep.
And we all want to win. We want to do well. We want to achieve good things in life. But that's not, if that's what defines us, that's what we're talking about right now. If that's what defines us, then it's going to lead to a dark place eventually, a place of depression and worthlessness, really, when things aren't going your way.
Yeah.
So we have this mindset, and we have this difference between like goals and achievements versus like the process and the formation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we approach the process properly with the right mindset, I think and I believe that in time you'll find success.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It may take longer for some people than others, but I think if you have that right mindset and that right approach, then in time you will find success.
Yeah.
But that process is what is going to define who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way that we approach community, our relationships, and our team, and even our opponents, our enemies, those things, that's going to define who we are at the end of the day. And goals tend to limit you to the thing, so if you set a goal and you achieve it, well, then you've achieved the thing that you wanted to achieve, and that's it, right? Now we set another goal, we try to achieve it, and then we set another goal. It's like that process never ends, right? And we're never really even content in that process. Like it's rare that we set a goal, we achieve it, and we're like, okay, we're done. I don't need to grow anymore. I don't need to try to achieve anymore. We're kind of, we're born to keep wanting more in that sense.
Yeah.
But the way that we approach those things holds a lot more value, and it can reflect in not just the goals that we set, but in every single thing that we do in life, every day with whomever, wherever, right? So there's so much more value in that. So value is not found on the quest itself, but in the manner that we pursue it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's a deep topic. I mean, even as we're talking about it, I feel like we could go off into different branches of this topic. And it's so important to focus on character development.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of one of the central themes that we're sort of circling around, is that you may actually be in a situation too where you don't get the outcome exactly. Let's say you don't get the win per se, but you improved in that situation. You personally know, I did better than I've ever done, or I increased my performance by, such and such percent. If you were doing something like a diet or nutrition plan, and you know that you might not have as many, be able to do as many push-ups or have burned quite as many calories as the person next to you who's also in the same program, it really doesn't matter, because as long as you're working towards your end goal and you're improving, it's important to celebrate that. And that's
Absolutely.
the other thing that we sort of forget to do often, is to celebrate those achievements. You and I classically have not celebrated as much as we should. We sort of are always on to the next thing, because we have these ideas and we think, oh, we got there, okay, let's get to the next space. And I think deliberately trying to celebrate along the way and teaching, it gives others permission around you to celebrate their achievements too.
Yeah.
So we don't live for the encouragement or the pat on the back. We keep moving forward. But we do need to take that minute to just say, yeah, you know what, that I got beat today, but I handled that well. I didn't get to where I wanted to get to at the end of the day, but I'm not melting down in a puddle because I didn't get there. Even those kinds of things, celebrating the achievement of reacting well and demonstrating good character.
Absolutely. Yeah, one thing I've told my students many times is there is a huge difference between boasting and celebrating. Like in your victories, you don't want to boast and be cocky, but to celebrate is good.
Yeah,
and
it's exciting.
Yeah, and that definitely it looks different than boasting, where you're maybe trying to rub it in somebody's face or build yourself up in front of others. Yeah. Celebrating is it's a joy, and it's not always even has to be doesn't always have to be in front of others necessarily.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
yeah.
Not to say it can't be, but I mean it's just the approach again.
Yeah.
It's the way that you're approaching the victory, the celebration, that becomes either just a healthy celebration or a boasting.
Yeah. We have to deal with this at home often with our kids.
Yeah.
Where they'll complain about, the other one rubbing it in their face that they did better, and we have to say, well, let's check in on that. Are they rubbing it in, or are they just celebrating that they did something well? And sometimes they are boasting, and other times they're just excited and celebrating. So I think it's important also to know, like we talk about self-awareness, know when you're trying to put others down with your celebration, and to be honest about that. Maybe you have a little, why would you do that? Because maybe there's a little hurt or something that you're still working through with that person. You want to get back at them for some reason. And we see this with our children at home, and we have to redirect this. And then there's just times when you're just, you put a lot of work in and you got to where you wanted to go, and you're excited about it,
right,
and you share it. And that's what we should be doing.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked before about, C.S. Lewis and his definition of humility. Probably not on this podcast, but we've talked about it before, where, really, and I'm not going to say it word for word, but the idea generally is that, humility is celebrating your accomplishment just as much as if it were my accomplishment. Celebrating my accomplishment just as much as if it were your accomplishment.
Right.
So we don't ignore it. We don't falsely pretend it's not important. But we are just as excited that this has been achieved, whether I personally in my physical body did that, or whether you personally in your physical body did it. It's going to be an achievement communally for everyone, So.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you kind of said that this topic could go in a lot of different directions. And we had some previous podcasts on loss and learn, which I think has a lot to do with this. Yeah. And a podcast on now I'm drawing a blank, what was just in my head, In any case, this can go a lot of different directions, but we want to bring it full circle to the sense that, like, we're talking about your enemy right now, and knowing your enemy and knowing yourself. And it's important that we understand that more often than not, that we ourselves are getting in our own way and preventing ourselves from reaching higher levels and achieving more. And, we are, and you are, capable of more than you think. And sometimes we get in this downward spiral of talking ourselves down. And it's important that, we learn to recognize and we learn to self-coach, self-coach ourselves through these things, and understand that, when we talked about, that's the one I wanted to talk about, was the
Came back to you.
Yes. The gaps.
Yes.
Right? Like,
yes.
We talked about the gaps that we need to learn to identify in order to grow. These are prevention gaps that keep us from growing.
Yeah.
And we all have a gap or gaps that prevent us from growing, and that is kind of like our enemy, so to speak, right? It's what prevents us from getting where we want to be.
It's our excuses list.
Yeah.
Somehow or another, it's our excuses that pop up.
Yeah. And so identifying that is crucial to your growth.
Yeah.
Understanding that you are often your own worst enemy.
Yeah.
John Maxwell says that you need to know yourself to grow yourself. And it's very, very true. Like, if you want to grow and if you want to keep moving forward in life, you do have to learn more about yourself, because there's things about each of us, and we've kind of, I think, mentioned Enneagram before as well. It's a great learning tool for discovering more about yourself.
Yeah.
Things that are at your core, possibly holding you back in life, and also about others, so that you can draw nearer to them and grow in better relationship and learn to communicate better, because that's often something that holds us back very much as well.
Right. That's so true.
So we need to know our enemy.
I'm just going to share one quick story.
Yeah,
just
go for it.
As we wrap up, because we're probably almost out of time. And it's just, so we own a jiu-jitsu, martial arts academy and fitness academy that we mainly teach Brazilian jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, and fitness. And there's a belt system in jiu-jitsu. It starts at white belt and it goes up to black. And I would say the average person who's showing up regularly can go from white to blue belt in under 2 years, right?
I'd say about 2 years.
About 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay, give or take, depending on how much they're training. So it took me 10 years to get my blue belt. And there was a lot of obstacles to that process for me. We had 3 children. These aren't excuses, they're reality. I had to stop training to have our babies. And it was frustrating because I would see students who were in the program at the same time, but they would be moving ahead much faster. And most practitioners do have periods where they might have an injury or such, so they have to step out. But I had a few different things come up like that. And I just finally realized that I am, number one, a slow brew with this. It's going to take me a while to progress. And number two, the season of life that I'm in and the way that I'm approaching this is going to take me a long time. And so once I finally was able to just realize that and be okay with my own process, I was like loving it more. It didn't really matter how long it took. It was just, I wasn't behind. In other words, I wasn't behind people. I was where I needed to be with it. And it gave me freedom. So I've used that sort of testimony in a sense of my own personal jiu-jitsu journey with other students. to encourage people and say, you know what, you have your own way. You could just be training something recreationally where someone else is training competitively. Those are two totally different mindsets. We all know, even with jobs, some people are trying to work up the ladder to get, from up to like a management position or higher position, and other people, really, that particular job might be a means to an end, where they're working for a certain period of time, but they ultimately have another transition they're going to make over to another field. That's okay. But if you don't take the time to evaluate what your personal goals are, what your, I guess you would say, ability, or the management that you have over the situation you're in, based on many factors in your life, if you don't take the time to analyze that, you could easily look at someone else and say, wow, I'm behind, or they're speeding ahead. Or you could proudly sort of boast in the idea that you're, racing past everyone else, because maybe you don't have some of the same hindrances as others around you. So it's important just to know where you are, and then also be able to evaluate honestly and graciously what it's going to take for you to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, it's very important, because in order to get from point A to point B, like you said, you got to know where you are and then where you want to be.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the problem is people don't know where they are.
They
right?
don't know.
They don't know where they are.
They haven't taken that time.
And they don't really evaluate that. And that's something you have to evaluate regularly, right? Because where you are kind of changes, if you're driving and you're going from point A to point B, where you are is constantly changing and has to be reevaluated in order to get to point B. So, you gotta know who you are. You gotta know your enemy. And we say your enemy because often, again, you are either tearing yourself down, convincing yourself that you can't do something, or sometimes you have the estimate of yourself is too high, right? Like you're just putting yourself up on a pedestal. And that's also going to wreck you at the end of the day, right? It's gonna tear you down. It's gonna destroy you at the end of the day. So you gotta remain humble. You have to have an honest estimate of who you are, and at the same time, if you want to be able to move forward in life, you have to know that you're capable of more than you think, and that can be more bad or more good. So. We got to keep in that mindset and keep reevaluating it, reassessing it, and that's how we're going to grow in life.
Agreed. In terms of comparison, which is often an issue that we have, that's one of the gaps. I always like to think, you know what, there's people who are better than me at this, and I'm better than others at this. I'm always, that situation will always be, even if you're Olympic level athlete, just wait 2 months and there's going to be someone who's faster than you, or better, or can achieve, or can a little bit more than you can. So that almost always applies to every situation. And it just reminds me that I can keep working personally to my best level always. And we're capable, like we always say, we're capable of so much more than we think. Yeah. We encourage you in that way.
Okay, guys, that's today's episode. Know your enemy.
Yes.
Who's your enemy?
Thanks for listening.